So here we are at the Lordly House Museum in Chester, Nova Scotia, and we're here with Cindy. Hello, Cindy.
Hello.
Pleasure to meet you. And
Nice to be here.
It looks like we're in an office, which I think we are. You can explain what this is and tell us a bit about, I understand, the history of the Lordly family and the museum and how this all came about. I would just say to folks at home, we have two chairs. Cindy has the more stable one. It makes total sense that the more unstable person would have the more unstable chair. So if you see me during this chat moving around like I'm Captain Kirk on the bridge of the Enterprise, that's why. It's sort of at like a 78-degree angle too, so I might lean this way. But these are the kind of fun things. It's like a theme park ride. So yay, this is going to be fun. Folks at home are like, just get to the interview, Paul. Tell me a bit about Lordly House and about the Lordlys and their history, the family, and their relationship to Chester and the area here.
Well, it really predates the Lordlys, the history of the house. It was built by Captain McCurdy, James McCurdy, and he was a seafarer, and he was lost at sea off the coast of Bermuda.
Oh.
So his widow and 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, retained ownership of the house. And originally the house was quite different. It looked more like a Cape Cod house with a salt box design.
Right.
And then later it was changed. So Margaret McCurdy and her sister Susie lived in the house longer than anyone else. But Margaret went off to Halifax, and she met Charles Lordly, and they were married. But I should probably precede that by telling you about Charles Lordly's father, Joseph Lordly.
This is kind of like the Old Testament. I'm trying to keep track of who begat who.
Right.
So Captain McCurdy lost at sea off Bermuda. His wife was Margaret?
Margaret?
Okay, good. So far, so good. She had a sister. Somehow a sister wandered into the story.
I'm sorry. Captain McCurdy's wife was Martha.
Martha, okay. Martha McCurdy. So which one married?
Their daughter, Margaret.
Their daughter, Margaret, married Lordly.
Right.
All right. See, it is very Old Testament, folks. A lot of names, trying to keep track. Okay.
But it's important because the house really, as I say, predates the Lordlys.
Right. Okay.
Right.
So Lordly's wife, Margaret, was the daughter of the people who originally built the house.
That's correct.
Yes. All right. My golden retriever mind can follow that. Onwards.
So the first Lordly that we know who lived in Nova Scotia was Joseph Lordly. Sadly, try as many people have, they can't find any record for his arrival, whether he came on a ship. Well, he would have had to come on a ship. Sorry, but what kind of a ship?
Pretty sure, yeah.
Was he a naval officer? Was he a passenger? Who knows? We do know he ended up in Nova Scotia, Halifax, probably about 1803. His tombstone says he was born 1781.
So roughly 22 when he got here.
Right. Now, he says he was born of English parents who happened to be in Italy. So, fine. However, subsequently somebody found a little miniature picture, and it was named Comte d'Orly as an Italian name. So their speculation was, is he one and the same guy? And when, let's say, this Italian guy arrives in Halifax, and he wants to make it big, so he joins the Anglican Church, and he assumes the name Lordly, and it all sounds very grand. Yeah. And he actually was quite successful in Halifax.
Lordly does sound like a very grand name as opposed to peasantly or something, or serfly.
Yes.
You're going to go straight to Lordly, yeah.
Right.
It's interesting. So we don't know for sure what his backstory is. It's kind of like, in the Wild West, you'd see people move out west, the Clint Eastwood, the man with no name, because you could lose yourself in the frontier. You can't do that now. Nowadays, we're numbered and cataloged, and everybody knows exactly where we are, and we willingly give our information to social media and everything. But back in these days, you could start an entirely new life, recreate yourself, just by showing up and saying, Lordly, potentially.
Right, yeah.
So that's part of what I like, the mystery.
Yeah, I think he was
history.
quite clever. And so we took advantage of every opportunity he had.
That's the polite euphemistic way of saying it. Took advantage of every opportunity. Sure, off the boat. Your name, sir? Lordly.
So that's Joseph, and he dies, I think, 1843.
Okay.
And subsequently, his son Charles then becomes somewhat of the executor administrator of the estate. So he arrives on scene with his wife Margaret, and at that point they move to this house, which they called Evergreen House at the time.
Oh, so we're back to Margaret.
Yeah.
So the son of the mystery man marries the daughter of the captain who drowns in Bermuda.
Right.
And this is where these two come into the story.
Right.
I see how it all links now.
And so they had, I believe, 10 children, but only 6 lived to adulthood.
Generally why you had 10 children, just
Yeah.
sort of to make
A couple
sure.
spares.
Yeah, you can find a lot of cemeteries in Nova Scotia from that period of time where there's sadly an awful lot of graves for small children because there were an awful lot of things that could kill them back then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like including things like chickenpox, smallpox, a whole bunch of poxes. So okay, they have some kids, 6 survive, 10 don't. And now we're into Charles Lordly. And at least we know who he is, even if we're not necessarily sure who his father might have been. Yeah.
So prior to 1879, as I say, he inherited a lot of property. He was generally a businessman. He operated, or was one of the owners of a lime kiln in East Chester, and which they would use for building materials and so forth. They would mine the lime. So that was a successful venture. He also probably loaned a lot of money to people, so he would take liens on their houses, and this is how he
Man
expanded.
after my own heart.
Right.
That's
So-
sort of, sure, I'll happily loan your money and take a lien on your house. What? Can't pay me back? Well, here comes the sheriff.
Yes, exactly. So, although records kind of indicate that he was highly regarded, they don't say that he was despised. So
Well,
he kind of came across as a hail fellow well met, I think.
I'm sure he probably was, but I'm also sure if he had a bunch of liens on people's houses in town and somebody asked, what do you think of him? He's a lovely man. Yes,
Yes.
of course he is. Absolutely the salt of the earth.
Charles was appointed first magistrate.
Was there a second magistrate?
Yes,
Oh.
who happened to be a son of his. There was no job interview, I don't think.
So where we're sitting now, what was this building when we were talking before we started, you mentioned it might have been a barn originally.
There probably was a barn associated with Lordly House, because of course they kept domestic animals and so forth, and there was an orchard behind and so forth.
Lovely.
But then, I'll jump ahead a little bit, 1879, when Chester became its own municipality, then Charles was appointed first magistrate. So this was his office, and this was his desk.
First magistrate who owns liens on any number of houses in town.
Yeah.
So, well, again, it's the 19th century, folks. This is sort of how it worked. But yeah, first magistrate, was there a second magistrate?
Yes,
Oh.
who happened to be a son of his. There you
Of course
go.
he was. So
Well, there's a picture of him over there.
keep it all in the family, again, which is generally sort of what they did back then.
Yes. There was no job interview, I don't think. I think.
I'm guessing not. Son, would you like to be second magistrate? Sure, Dad. What's it entail? Well, don't ask too many questions about the liens. But other than that. But yeah, that's what prosperous people would do. Business people would have multiple connections, often through churches. They would be involved in the church life of the community, everything from missionary societies to temperance movements, maybe. But they'd also be involved in all the various aspects of the community business, the legal element, the upper crust, as they would say. So the Lordly family, wherever they originally came from, did pretty well for themselves within the space of less than 100 years.
They had a remarkable family for the time. Most of their children left.
Oh.
And I think I just keep trying to understand what was the influence, what suggested them that it was a good idea to go get an education in New York or take on a profession. So the old son studied at Columbia University in New York, became a physician, and had a well-established practice in New York.
Very nice.
He was one of the founders of the Kennel Club and also a bicycling society in New York. So he was,
the New York Kennel Club, like the big one?
yeah.
Where they
he had an entry in that.
So they still have the big dog show that you can watch on television every year? He was involved with that?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Personal note, my wife and I watch that every year.
Yeah,
So,
yes.
so
It's fun.
you can always find something. I tell everybody, in every story, in every museum, you'll hear something. Everybody's unique. So everybody listening to this might not, I clue in, he was involved in founding that. I watch that every year. So there's a little connection. And he originally came from here, and his grandfather was a mystery man from maybe Italy or England. So it makes the dog show even more interesting to me now.
Okay.
So he goes down, becomes a doctor, goes to Columbia,
Right.
and found a dog show. What about the rest of the kids?
Okay, well, the second son, Edwin, gets his Master Mariner's paper, sails the world. He was in South America, he was in Mediterranean, UK, and so forth. And he only hung up his papers or left to sea after he was called home to become the magistrate, the second magistrate.
Right. So he sort of followed in his other grandfather's footsteps, the one who drowned, who was a mariner off Bermuda.
Yes.
So that's typical for maritime families, that many of the sons would wind up going to sea in that time period. So that makes sense.
So Edwin tried to interest a younger brother, Alfred, in becoming a seafarer. And he did. He took one trip to South America and said, that's it, I'm not doing it anymore.
I'm with Alfred.
So he goes to New York and becomes, maybe the equivalent of a stockbroker or a financier. And he's very successful, has a lovely home on Long Island. And then, one thing that keeps in common with this family is they all come home almost every summer.
Right.
So there are some photographs, everybody sitting around under the big chestnut trees, and several are buried here. So.
Oh, okay.
And then another son also studied medicine, but he went off to Costa Rica, and sadly he developed a fever and passed away at a young age. So he left a widow and a young daughter, and they went back to, I think they settled in the States.
As you can read the historical records of the 17th, 18th, 19th century, even into the 20th century, especially military campaigns, if you were somewhere in Central America or the Caribbean, and the way to sort of see this is military campaigns, you would see more soldiers were dying of disease, far more soldiers were dying of disease than were actually dying in battles. So that's part of the story. If you went down there, fever's a fever, and there were many suspects, dengue, malaria could kill you. So he sadly fell afoul of that. So that's 4. Is that 4?
Yes, and now there are 2 women. So one is Lillian, and she never marries. She, at some point, decided she wanted to go to California with a cousin and her husband. Moved to California and had a lodge, a tourist lodge.
Mm-hmm.
So she wanted to do that. Fine. So because she was somewhat of a burden to, by this time Charles was gone, and the mother doesn't really have a real source of income. She's not living a plush life. So because she used to write there was a letter to one of the stockbroker's son, please send money, look after Lillian, she spends too much, right?
There's always a sibling like that, and I think you know who you are in my family. Actually, both my brother and sister both watching this going, no, which one is he talking about? So yeah, okay, she's...
Poor Lillian, she does try. She gives music lessons
I like
locally.
that. She does try. She gives it a try.
Yeah, so that she tries to sell crafts and things at the Christmas season, but it's really not enough to...
So in California, or did she...
This is here.
Oh, okay.
And before she goes to California.
Oh, I see,
And then
okay.
I don't know. I guess it's just a sense of adventure.
Right. Well, it was still the frontier.
It was.
Back then. Very much the frontier. Even today, still some people go to California looking for fame and fortune. But back then, we think of it, now, the freeways and everything, but it was still would have been the late 1800s, still would have been elements of the Wild West and the frontiers. So yeah, I can see how that would have been very exciting to a wanderlust kind of spirit, which it sounds like she was.
Yeah. And then the youngest daughter, Annie, went off again. She followed footsteps of her brothers, went to New York and studied nursing. And she earned a degree and worked in the New York area for a number of years. But by this time, her brother Edwin was very sick. He had a stroke, and so he became confined to a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. So it was considered her duty to come home and look after him. And I think crushed her spirit somewhat, but she did it. And so finally, when the immediate family were gone, she too went to California.
Oh.
And she really wanted to just visit, but anyways, she ended up staying there for the remainder of her life.
California, I've been there. It has a way of sucking you in, even today. It's a beautiful place. It sounds like, if the Bronte sisters or the Austens were sitting around and going, we need a subject for our next book, strange family, mystery background, man of mystery, and then they become successful, and then, some adventurous types wander off to California, and the more stable financial fellows are in New York. That's like a mini-series on HBO. So it's quite the story. It's not unique, too, to the 19th century, because people were always moving and reinventing themselves. But it's a pretty good exemplar of that kind of thing that was taking place in that century. California in your time would have been much different than the California of today that my folks know.
I'm guessing. I don't know your time.
Neither do I. That's I'm a man out of time. I have popped out of my TARDIS, Mrs. Lordly, and I've spoken to some folks about the house and your family, which, believe me, had a very interesting, some tales to be told. But I thought I would come directly to the person herself and get the 411, as we say in my century, about what's going on. So tell me a bit about your family and this wonderful house, the inside story, as it were.
Oh my, that could take a long time.
Oh no, tell me about it. I was talking to this wonderful lady and it was about 45 minutes and I think she just scratched the surface.
I heard that story. Yes, she did just scratch the surface. We were a large household of 10 children, 2 adults, and 2 other family.
Right.
Dear sweet aunties in this big house.
Did they live up in the small room up there?
They did have a room in the house, yes.
Right.
They would use the back stairs.
And they had a very short ceiling in one of the doorways.
Yes, nowadays people really have to watch their head going through that door.
Yes, they do. Even Time Lords occasionally miss the watch your head sign as you're walking through. So yes, tell me about your children. You must be very proud of them.
So proud, very proud. Had 10, as I said. Hard to keep them straight sometimes.
I know.
One went off to New York to study medicine. That would be James. And his younger sister insisted on following him.
She became a nurse, right?
She tried.
Oh.
Yes, she did. But she was more into it for New York than anything else. Edwina was just like that. You couldn't keep a good girl down.
I've known some people like that, very into New York, less interested in actually working in New York. So fair enough, totally fair. But did he go to Columbia, your son?
I think that's what attracted him.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. And did I hear a rumor? Did he do
There are a lot of rumors.
Yes, there certainly are. Did I hear a rumor that he got involved with a dog show? Was he the one that got involved with the dog show?
He didn't tell me that.
Oh, hold on now. This Time Lord knows more about your son. Well, I took him on a ride around Zeta Reticuli with my TARDIS, so we chatted.
Okay.
So, he went to medical school, your daughter nursing.
Tried to follow him, yes. And I think it was New York that she wanted to see.
Right.
And they came home regularly. They came home Christmases and special occasions. The hardest thing was the waiting for them to get from Halifax to here. My, that coach takes so long.
Oh, did they come by land coach or boat?
It depends. Sometimes they came by boat, but
Right.
often they went up through Halifax.
Well, at least they weren't. At least they didn't go to California, and because that would have been a much longer journey. So fortunately, your children just went to New York.
One did go to California, but came back quickly. Wasn't what they thought it was going to be.
Right, because California in your time would have been much different than the California of today that my folks know and love.
I'm guessing. I don't know your time.
Neither do I. That's I'm a man out of time. Do you want to know what happens to your family as they move into the 20th century?
I would love to. Why? Have you heard from them?
I haven't heard directly from them, but I've heard from people who might be in the know. I think it might be your granddaughter. I'm not exactly sure. She becomes a bit of a war hero, or heroine, I suppose.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my.
And then she marries another war hero, a soldier, who becomes knighted by the Queen.
And is this written up in those new things they call books?
Yes, written up in books, or as we say at the Time Lord Academy, iPads. It's a way of transferring
That's
knowledge.
a new one.
I know. But yes, they become war heroes and spies, and they live very interesting and exciting and adventurous lives. And then eventually become Sir, I forget his name, and she becomes Lady, whatever his last name was. But they become part of the aristocracy. Truly lordly.
Of Britain.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, of the United Kingdom.
I've always been concerned also about how long it takes a ship to get from England to Canada.
Well, good news for you on that front, too. We have ships that fly through the air now.
Through the air.
Through the air, yes, ma'am. And so you can get to London in about 5 hours.
Oh my. Oh my. I definitely was born in the wrong generation.
That's what I keep
You're
telling
wrong
people
century.
about myself, too. Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Lordly. This has been a very illuminating conversation. This is why I went to Time Lord Academy, so I could travel back in time and meet the folks who made our world what it is today.
And where is that Time Lord Academy?
Sadly, it's just outside New York. So,
Well, I won't be going.
and I probably won't be going back either. Go Red Sox. So, thank you very much, ma'am, for telling us something about your history today in this wonderful house and your children who went on, honestly, to lead very interesting lives.
They did that.
Yes. And your granddaughter, I think, the spy. So that's kind of pretty cool, actually.